This is YRV live at 5, your rural voice live across the country and the Riverina. And today we've got a good show ahead of us. We're going to be looking at a range of issues that have been going on and look at whether or not our international community is getting along fairly or just playing unfair, especially when we look at the conflicts in Syria, Ukraine, and Turkey. It is a wild, wild west out that way at the moment. And we shouldn't forget that what happens overseas can ultimately impact our communities. I would like to start though by, welfare, social or corporate welfare. This is a big issue at the moment. It's been brought up by our illustrious members in Canberra, and they keep telling us that we are living in a situation where basically there are lifters and leaners. And for $2.5 billion over multiple decades, there are just way too many single mums and young people looking to bludge off the welfare system. But I think that's a little bit unfair on our younger generation, and it begs the question, are we blaming the wrong people for the wrong problem? Because when we look at welfare, we have to ask ourselves, is it about charity or is it about social stability? We can't just say, well, go get a job if there just are no jobs out there for them. At this moment in time, many rural communities have youth unemployment anywhere as high as 20 to 30%, depending on where we're looking. Now, is this because our young don't want to work? Well, clearly not. Because if you're not actively looking for work, you can't be considered unemployed. And therefore, we are looking at a huge proportion of our young people actively seeking employment and not being able to access it. Why is this? Is it that our businesses can't find well-trained young people to take on the jobs that are available? And if that's the case, why aren't we investing in our TAFEs? Why are we not making a decision to provide the support that our communities need today to provide workers for tomorrow rather than importing them from overseas? Because there's absolutely no point whatsoever in importing workers from overseas if we have unemployed young people who are more than capable of being trained up to do these jobs. And that's why the complete defunding of TAFE over the last 2 decades by both Labor and Liberal governments has been one of the worst policy decisions driven by ideology in a very long time. TAFE was a cornerstone of our trades industry, was a cornerstone for helping people transition from high school into the workforce that were semi-skilled to skilled industries. It also allowed people who may have missed out on an opportunity to go to university to do nursing, for instance, to actually do that through TAFE. But we got rid of it. We destabilised the entire process by defunding it, privatising it, and now we're seeing literally hundreds of millions of dollars, even potentially billions of dollars going to private education service providers who A, don't provide quality education, 2, don't meet the needs of our businesses, and 3, simply see taxpayer dollars diverted away from serving our community to serving the profits of private businesses. And in the country, within our community, this is a major problem, because I know for a fact that in the town that I'm in, there are a number of engineering companies who are looking for tradies, who are looking for young people to take on apprenticeships, and they just can't find them. And the question has to be, is this because our TAFEs have been defunded? Is this because we have not actually adequately provided the means to train up the next generation to fulfill these jobs within our community? Welfare is not about charity. I want to say that again. It's not about charity, because if it was about charity, it'd be all about feeling sorry for them. But it's not. We provide welfare as a safety net because we know if people are left to fend for themselves and they fall into poverty, the chances of them entering into a life of crime is increased, and we know that people who enter a life of poverty will make decisions that are likely to impact the rest of the community negatively. We need to protect people from falling out of the system. And it's a small cost. The cost of providing a small welfare payment that keeps people out of poverty is much less than the cost of having to deal with the health and social and sometimes criminal consequences that occur when we allow our most vulnerable to fall into a life of poverty. Homelessness, drug addiction, all those sorts of things that we do know can be associated with poverty are exacerbated when governments don't provide adequate support to them. And simply bringing in a whole lot of moral controls for those who happen to not have a lot of money, well, if that's not Big Brother, I don't know what is. Let's be honest. No one wants people bludgeoning off the dole. No one wants to see anyone sitting around not getting a job. But if someone's trying to get a job, if someone's trying to train up to have the skills to get the jobs that are available, then frankly, whether or not they buy a case of beer every now and then, or whether they smoke a cigarette, or whether they just happen to eat a certain type of food that other people don't agree with, well, frankly, that's their business and not ours. We don't go around and question whether or not it's wise for people in North Shore to be hitting up on cocaine or heroin. We don't go around questioning whether or not CEOs are misusing their funds when they go out and have a bottle of wine with their friends. The reality is these are personal choices, and they should not be choices dictated to anyone by any government. The reality is we as a society have said that alcohol can be available to those who are adults and to be used responsibly by adults. And if that's the case, then that should be for all adults. As soon as we start dividing people up into groups of those we can trust to be adults and those we can't trust to be adults, well, that's Big Brother. And I don't know about you, but I like to think we live still in a democracy. We still live in a free society where people get to make their own choices. And that seems to be the buzzword amongst liberals. It's all about choice. Well, if it's truly about choice, then it really should remain the case when it comes to welfare just as much as any other area. Because it's not just the poor who get a good tax break, so to speak, but it's also our corporate friends at the top. We spend billions of dollars every year subsidising our miners when it comes to their fuel bill. Now, at the end of the day, if we have a mine that is so low in its profit yield that it needs its fuel bill subsidised by the taxpayer, we really have to ask the question, should we even bother with this mine? The mine has to be profitable. And if the mine is not profitable, well, you know what? Don't operate it. Don't let the taxpayer subsidise a poor business decision. And that is, I think, the great inequity when we discuss welfare and cracking down on waste in the budget, is it is very much a one-sided affair. It's one where, at the moment, you're looking at a situation where they're kicking the poor, the vulnerable, the weak, because they're easy. It's easy to find that person who's made some poor decisions and is, the ideal dole bludger, put them on the front of the Sunday Telegraph and hope that we all forget that the cost that that person imposes on society is much less than the cost of subsidising major businesses in Australia for things that frankly shouldn't be subsidised, because these subsidies don't drive productivity, they don't drive employment, and they don't have a net benefit overall for our community. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't have business subsidies. It's not to say we shouldn't have tax breaks. It's saying that we have subsidies, we have tax breaks that don't deliver for the community, and we shouldn't tolerate that. I think one of the things that I find as a classic example of, basically providing a tax break to people who don't need it, don't deserve it, and frankly contribute to potentially harmful impacts on our society, it's when we look at the gambling industry. I mean, we have major RSLs with millions and millions of dollars squirreled away into accounts, and they don't pay any tax on it. Now, that's fine. I'm not calling for the end of gambling. But I think if people look at pokies and we look at the cost to operate in these things and the impacts on society from problem gambling, I think it's fair to say that whether it's an RSL or whether it's a pub or a club, they should pay a fair and reasonable contribution in tax based on their gambling revenue. Because at the end of the day, why should the rest of society cover the cost and bear the cost for the problems that are associated with problem gambling, when the very industries that enable problem gamblers to go about their business really receive very, very favourable tax breaks and tax systems. And I think as a society, we need to question whether or not we're providing the breaks to the wrong people at the wrong time. Because I'll be honest with you, I'd rather see our pokey barons paying a fair share of tax than seeing basically a single mother struggling to pay her rent. Now, whether or not it was wise of her to have that child in the first place is another question. But at the end of the day, why should we punish that child simply because we want to be on some kind of moral high ground that, well, she's poor, she made a poor decision, therefore we should punish this family for that? Well, I'd rather see that child be given the opportunity to be in a safe, comfortable house, be given the opportunity to have food each day, and to have the opportunity to reach their full potential rather than be victimized as somehow a lesser person because they're unfortunately growing up in a situation where they do need the support of the government through welfare. Now, transitioning back to what's been YRV Live's issue of the month, and that is water. Water is, as you know, an ongoing issue within our communities. At the moment, we've been receiving a lot of rain. And just a reminder to anyone out there driving, if you are seeing any water on the road, just don't risk it. If it's water on the road, don't bother. Head home, have a cup of coffee, and just wait for the water to recede. There's no point in putting yourself or other people in danger because you think you know how deep that water is. If the roads are blocked, don't risk it, okay? But after the rains, we do get droughts. And with droughts comes shortage, and with shortage, well, comes increases in the cost of water. And as we've been investigating this month, water is a big, big issue, especially the future water market. At this stage, there is not a single government, not a single party that I'm aware of that has any policy position on managing the misuse or the manipulation of the future waters market in the events of a future drought. We are in a position where industries like the coal seam gas industry, foreign commodity traders can come into rural communities, buy up water access and water rights, and use those assets to actually drive up the cost of water to make a hefty profit at the expense of our agribusinesses and our local communities. And that's something that we need to address. And it's not just me who's saying this. In fact, if you go out on the streets and you ask anyone in your community, do you think water should be owned by people overseas? The answer is resoundingly no. And it's across the community. And that's why at YRV Live, we're going to give you a snippet of one of our interviews from a member of the community in the Riverina who had a very thoughtful and reflective response on whether or not water should be owned by people simply as a commodity and what sort of impact that would have on our community. So we're just going to show you that clip right now. So what do you think about foreigners buying up water and withholding it from our community?
Yeah, water I see is one of the very vital commodity of life, whether in a family life or a farmer's perspective, in every as well as business. Water is one of the very important thing, and for not to be under our control, we put our life under threat. So if it is a threat now, what can we have for our children of tomorrow? So we have to, there are some things that we can give it away, but there are things that are very important we have to be in our control, in our hands. And one of them is water. It's very, very important. So we can go without something, but we can't go without water.
And that was a member of the Riverina community giving a really thoughtful reflection on how we can't go without water and water should stay in our communities. And that's what we're really going on about here. It's not that we shouldn't be allowed to buy and sell water within our communities or buy and sell water between agribusinesses. It's about saying if water is being purchased, it needs to be used within the community for the community. And commodity traders, whether they be overseas or in Sydney, are not purchasing these rights for the benefit of our agricultural industries. They're not buying it for the benefit of our local communities. They're buying it for their own profit margins and for the benefit of their next Lamborghini purchase. And that, my friends, I think is completely unfair and unreasonable. And that's why it concerns me that at YRV Live, we have been following up the Federal Minister's Office, who's responsible for water, which is Barnaby Joyce's agricultural ministry. And his media team, for whatever reason, has decided not to comment and has not been willing to answer any of our questions on the future waters market. And so if you know anyone from that department that, is willing to actually give a straight answer on where our government stands on the future water market, we'd love to hear from you, because at the end of the day, if our government is silent on this issue, it's probably telling us one of two things. One, they haven't thought about this as a problem and therefore don't have a policy response to it. Two, they're aware that this is a problem, but for whatever reason, they don't want to address it. Or three, they're quite content and quite happy to see our rural communities be exposed to global commodity traders for reasons only known to themselves. And so I do reach out to the Minister's Office and his media team and the Minister himself. We'd love to hear from him, and we'd love to hear what they have to say about the futures water market and what they're going to do to ensure that our rural communities are protected from basically being gouged of money by commodity traders in water. Now, just because we've got a lot of water today does not mean we're going to have a lot of water tomorrow. And just because these people have not flooded the market in an attempt to squeeze the market doesn't mean they won't do it in the future. When we look at the wheat market globally and we look at other water markets globally, there have been several instances where people have attempted, and sometimes quite successfully, have squeezed those markets, forcing the price up artificially at great expense to local communities and rural industry. And that's something that is really close to my heart and close to everyone's heart in the rural community, and that is, how do we protect our water assets? But moving overseas now, recently there's been a number of ceasefires agreements in Syria, and none of them have held. And people sometimes say, well, why is this? Why is it that our Syrian ceasefires have not held? Why can't the Russians and the Americans all get along? Well, put simply, what the Russians want to achieve, what the Americans want to achieve, what Bashar al-Assad wants to achieve, and the various other players in Syria want to achieve just don't align. There is a conflict of interest that has no common ground. And as much as the Americans, the Russians, the Australians and the English like to tell us that they've got a solution to this problem, they really don't. Bashar al-Assad, for good or for ill, is in a strong position at the moment. He is likely to regain Aleppo over the next few years, should he maintain the support he has from the Russians. And if you look at the groups that the West has backed, they've either basically been subsumed into what we would consider terrorist organisations, or we're backing the Kurds. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, backing the Kurds, but if we do support the Kurdish people, then we're likely to see a situation where Syria will be split into three regions, and Syria as we know it will never re-emerge. It will be a divided country and will face decades of struggle, very similar to what Lebanon faced in the 80s and 90s. But the problem with backing the Kurds is that you've got the Turks. Now, the Turks do not like the Kurds. They have been fighting the Kurds on and off for decades now. They are, particularly the current president, very, very keen to suppress any movement towards an independent Kurdish state or even semi-autonomous region within Syria for the Kurds, because they see that as a proto-state that could encroach into their own territory. And they will violently and militarily respond to that. We've already seen it. They've already moved in heavily with their own tanks, air force and artillery to push back the Kurds in near the border in the north. And we have to acknowledge that until we can come to some resolution between the Turks, the Russians, and the Bashar al-Assad regime, this conflict is going to go on for some time. The refugee problem with it from The Syrian conflict is not going to go away. It's going to continue. And the reality is these on and off ceasefires, I think in many respects, are just basically a smokescreen. They're there to give the false impression that there is some progress in resolving the conflict. And realistically, they come on the back of heavy fighting and really probably align with the various factions needing a little bit of a breather to resupply and rearm for the next major push. And really, these ceasefires are nothing more than pieces of paper that look good on 7 o'clock news, but haven't really achieved much. The instability in the Middle East will continue, I would imagine, for at least another 10 years. The situation in Iraq is definitely not getting all that much better. They're yet to retake Mosul from ISIS, and that, from the sounds of it, is going to be a very bloody street-to-street fight and a situation that we really do need to ask ourselves, why are Australian assets in the Middle East contributing to these conflicts? Why are we in Syria? Why are we in Iraq? These conflicts, in many respects, have very little to do with us. And the more we get involved, the more we make ourselves targets for a conflict that, frankly, has very little to do with people in our country. But having said that, I do, very much respect the work of the Australian Defence Force, and I would never criticise the work of our Australian Defence Force. They simply follow out the will of our government, and it's up to our government to make some wiser decisions about where they're going to apply force into the future. And hopefully we can get out of this quagmire that is the Syrian and Iraqi conflict that is going on over there. Which leads us to Turkey. Really, Erdogan has really moved forward to become the next Ottoman emperor. And he has absolutely purged any semblance of resistance. In the last week or so, he's gotten rid of over 20,000 teachers. He's fired literally tens of thousands of judges and lawyers, and he's systematically going through every layer of Turkish society and removing any and all opposition to him. We can only assume that this is about ensuring that he can establish a Putin-like dictatorship in Turkey. And it probably explains why Erdogan has now moved closer to Putin than he has to the West. He certainly sees a friend, I think, more in Putin than he does in Barack Obama. And I think we will see the Turkish situation become more and more dire over the next 5 years. And it's a very significant concern for the stability of the Balkans. It's also a major concern for the stability of the Middle East, as Turkey was really the last bastion of stability, peace, and hope for things to be a little bit calm in the Middle East. But if you look at the conflicts that are breaking out throughout that region, unfortunately, those problems are now seeping very much into the Turkish society. And whilst I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that my analysis of the current situation in Turkey is incorrect, the reality is more and more we're looking at a new dictatorship, a new Ottoman emperor in some respects in Erdogan, and he will certainly use the Kurds, the Gulans as scapegoats, and he will do that to enforce his will and to ensure his regime remains intact for, well, as long as he's alive at least. And that's why you'll see him move closer and closer to the Russians, unless, of course, he does something silly like blow up one of their jets again. He seems to have been able to resolve that problem, but that doesn't mean he couldn't be silly enough to do it again. And that really sums up YRV Live for today. We've looked at a number of issues. We've looked at the welfare, social and corporate. Who really receives it? Why do we have it? And really asking the question, are we giving tax breaks to industries that don't deserve them whilst targeting the most vulnerable within our society? We looked at water, and we continue to do so. We'll do so until the end of this month, when we will be moving on to our next in-depth issue, which is going to be mental health in rural communities. Now, this is a sensitive topic and one that we at YRV Live wish to treat respectfully and to take the time to do so in a way that is beneficial for our community. So we're going to be looking at mental health within our rural community next month. We're going to be chatting to, we're hoping to chat to Susan Lee. We're also hoping to chat to members of the general community about what it means to deal with mental health, to know people with mental health situations, and of course, encourage people. If you need help, reach out. There are many opportunities now for people who might be depressed or feeling down or having mental health concerns. See your local GP, reach out to Beyond Blue, call Lifeline, and we will provide that number on our website after this show. So it's very important. If you know of someone or you're in that situation, make sure you reach out, because we're going to be looking at that in depth next month, looking at what the future for mental health in the country looks like and whether or not we're moving forward or backwards in providing care for people. So that's next month, looking at mental health. We'll be wrapping up water rights over the next week. And we certainly are hoping in that time to hear from the various, from the New South Wales Water Ministry, and we're also looking forward to hearing from the Federal Ministry. But we will pursue them like a dog with a bone, and we will make sure that we find out where they stand, because silence is not an answer, and our governments have a responsibility to respond to their citizens' concerns and to respond to the questions of their citizens. And that's what we do here at YRV Live. If you have questions, if you want to contribute, don't be afraid to put your questions or comments on the Facebook page. Send us an email via Share a Story. But most importantly, be a part of the conversation. Join us at yourruralvoice.com. Subscribe today. Become a patron through Patreon. And basically, let's get independent rural media going again and supporting one another as we deal with the issues that matter to us from our perspective. So this is YRV Live. On behalf of Your Rural Voice, this is Kieran Drabsch, and we look forward to speaking and chatting with everyone in the country next Thursday at YRV Live at 5 on Thursdays. And you have a lovely afternoon. This is Kieran Drabsch for YRV Live.